First, I would like to say thank you to all of you who took your time this evening to come out for this very, very important topic, discussion, and how it has affected our communities and our families. So I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for coming out tonight for this very special presentation with our guest speaker, Dr. Scott Poland, who is an internationally recognized expert on how today's chaotic world is affecting our youth. Thank you to the elected officials who took time out of their busy schedules to be here and to support this effort. Mayor Ortiz, I know that you're here. Thank you, Mayor, for always coming out and supporting everything about our families and our children. I saw Commissioner Schwartz is here also. Thank you for coming out. And we have a lot of other folks from our city. A lot of our principals are here, a lot of principals from all the schools within the City of Pembroke Pines, a lot of elected officials that were either elected prior and are now just very civic activists. Former Commissioner Lois Wexler is here. Thank you for being here. We have Ms. Beebe from DCF. Thank you so much for being here as well. This is an important night, and unfortunately, in light of many recent events, it is very much needed, and it is very, very timely. Our children are growing up in a world that is very different than the one that most of us grew up in. All of us have been touched by these recent events. Tonight's forum comes at a time when we continue to grieve for the souls lost in the Marjory Stoneman Douglas tragedy, the youth suicides in our community, and the many forms of depression that we are seeing in our children. We are beginning to question everything about how we interact with our children, with other children, with parents, and in our schools. We all need to learn ways to help us help our children. Across this nation, young people are organizing, and they are saying, never again. I'd like for you all to say that. Never again. Never again. Never again. We need to stand strong with them. We need to let them know that we, as the adults in the community, are supporting them. We need to let them know that we understand where they're coming from and where they want to go, and that their never again should always be a never again. I am so grateful to be working with our Education Roundtable Forum, which is comprised of principals from all schools located in Pembroke Pines, as well as many community leaders. Special thank you to Principal Michael Castellano of our West Campus Charter School for all his help with this forum. The topics that Dr. Poland will address are very dear to my heart. We are here to hear Dr. Poland's knowledge, expertise, and insights on how we can help our children cope with stress, bullying, cyberbullying, self-mutilation, depression, and suicide. We have not dealt correctly with mental health issues. Funding for facilities and counselors is, you know what, embarrassingly low. Embarrassingly low. I know that sounds pretty rough and hard to hear, but you know what? We cannot bury our heads in the sand and just hope that this epidemic goes away. Because guess what, folks? It will not go away unless someone takes action. And you all are here tonight, and this is a fabulous, fabulous turnout. Thank you. But you all are here tonight to say, never again. We don't want those things for our children and our families. By joining together, we are taking positive steps towards solutions. We're looking honestly at today's stressors that are affecting our children, and we are learning what we can do as parents, grandparents, guardians, educators, and community activists to help our children get through these difficult times and to grow into positive and fulfilled young adults. And we do have to remember that as old as they think they are, They are still children, and they need help and they need guidance. We want to take back our families. We need to take back our families. Families need to be the core of life, which it has not been for a long, long time, and we need to take back our families. So having said all of that, let's get on with the evening, and you all will be enlightened, and I hope that it turns a spark on within you, that when we have other events, and you maybe sponsor events, that we continue with this never again, and we continue to find ways to help our youth have a better life. So I would first like to introduce, if I could, Mr. Charles Dodge, who is our city manager and is the superintendent of our charter school system. Mr. Dodge.
Thank you, Commissioner. A couple of years ago, Commissioner Siple formed the Principals Roundtable that she mentioned, and this was for all Pembroke Pines schools, both the public charter schools and all of our traditional public schools. And the principals, they meet and they discuss many issues, and the various topics that really affect our schools and our students and families. These meetings have been expanded to include speakers who have shared information with us, and that's information at this time we would like to share with you. Tonight's forum is a result of this Education Roundtable, sharing the expertise of those speakers with all of you. This is our first such forum, and we hope to have many more. Pembroke Pines Charter West Principal Michael Castellano has taken the lead as part of the Educational Roundtable in finding experts who can best help not only our teachers, our educators, but also the parents, guardians, and community leaders in dealing with the many issues and concerns facing our children and students today. I would now like to introduce to you Principal Michael Castellano.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Again, my name is Michael Castellano, and I am privileged to serve as principal of the City of Pembroke Pines Charter School West Campus, alongside my colleagues and friends, Mr. Peter Bear, Mr. Sean Chance, Dr. Libedinsky, and Ms. Robin Battle. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize all the educators, administrators, principals throughout the City of Pembroke Pines and in our community. If you're here with us this evening, educators, teachers, administrators, please stand and be recognized. I think I echo the sentiments of our crowd tonight in saying thank you for all you do, for educating, for protecting, for always standing for the rights of children. Thank you for all that you do. Before I introduce our guest speaker for this evening, I'd like to share some information on several ways that you can remain connected to future events and workshops such as this one. As you walked in tonight, you should have received a flyer with a link to submit your name and your email address. This is the perfect way to stay connected to future events that we will be having here at the Charles Dodge City Center. In addition, a video of tonight's workshop will be posted on the city's YouTube page under Pembroke Pines Media, so be sure to subscribe. Also, like us on Facebook at City of Pembroke Pines. Follow us on Instagram under Pines Media and Twitter at City_P-Pines. This information will also be available on our city's website, ppines.com. Throughout the presentation, we want to make this as interactive as possible. We will be collecting your questions electronically, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can when it comes time for the Q&A. Simply use your electronic device, log on to Slido, which is right behind me, and enter the event code X614 and ask your question. Directions are also on the flyer. And now, it is my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Scott Poland, who is a professor at the College of Psychology and the co-director of the Suicide and Violence Prevention Office at Nova Southeastern University. Dr. Poland is a licensed psychologist and an internationally recognized expert on youth suicide, school crisis, and parenting during challenging times. He has authored and co-authored 5 books and many chapters and articles on these subjects. His 5th book, entitled Suicide in Schools, was published in 2015. He also co-authored the Suicide Safer Schools Plan for the state of Texas and the Crisis Action School Toolkit on Suicide for the state of Montana. He previously directed psychological services for a large Texas school system for 24 years and is a past president of the National Association of School Psychologists and a past prevention division director of the American Association of Suicidology. He is very dedicated to prevention and has testified about the mental health needs of our children before the U.S. Congress on 4 occasions. He is a founding member of the National Emergency Assistance Team and has personally assisted school communities after tragedies. Please put your hands together and join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Poland.
Thank you very much. It's indeed my pleasure to be here tonight. Most of all, I hope to say some things that are helpful to every single one of you. How many of you are parents? Would you mind raising your hands? How many of you are parents of adolescents? I am so sorry. Of course, I don't mean that. But in today's world, it's not enough to know your kids' friends. You got to know the kids' friends' parents. You have to be the one that demands to know what's going on. So a big message tonight will be about protecting our children and staying involved in their lives. And I get to do a lot of parenting sessions, but this is the largest crowd I've had in 19 years. The largest crowd ever was in Littleton, Colorado, 2 days after the Columbine massacre. So you are all to be commended. Your coming out tonight shows how much you care about your own children and the children in your community. You know, the word suicide was mentioned, and I'll be talking about that tonight. But first of all, I'm pretty certain I'm not the only person in this room that had their life affected by a suicide. When I was 25, my dad died by suicide. If you lost a friend, you lost a neighbor, you lost a student, you lost a loved one, I have some idea of what you've gone through. But I believe strongly in prevention, and I do believe that most tragedies that affect our children could have been prevented. And adult involvement is a key to that. And I always like to ask students themselves, who's your go-to adult at school? Who's your go-to adult in the community? And I hope you'll go home tonight and ask your own children, who would you go to at school if there was a real problem or something potentially dangerous? And obviously, we want you to be their go-to adult. So that is one of the keys to prevention. Let's look at just a few statistics here to start with. Yes, it is challenging times, and unfortunately, suicide deaths occur far more often than all those other things you see up there behind me. More so than virtually every childhood disease put together. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death for a teenager. The most dramatic rise has been the suicide rate for middle school age girls. Yes, bullying is related. We will talk about that. How many of you saw the Netflix incredibly popular program, 13 Reasons Why. Do you know that virtually every message in that program was wrong and unsafe? And perhaps one of them that upset me the most was that the adults in that program were portrayed as mean, absent, clueless, or uncaring. And that did a great disservice to adults who were very caring about children. And the portrayal of Mr. Porter, the counselor, was among the worst possible. I actually love school counselors. I think they're wonderful individuals. They're trying hard. But just the other day in this county, a school counselor told me her ratio was 1 to 1,200. And years ago, as the president of the National Association of School Psychologists, we said 80% of the mental health services a kid in this country receives, they get them at school. At first, that might sound good, unless you actually are a school counselor or school psychologist, and you realize how few of you there are and how many children need so much in the way of mental health treatment. So, challenging time to be a parent. It's called the screen age. All those digital devices. And by the way, one of the commissioners mentioned family. You know, McDonald's says they have the full value meal, but you know where it is really? It's at home. It's around your kitchen table with free and easy conversation between children and parents. And I recommend things like technology-free meals. Sometimes the mom says, oh, but it's my husband. He would never put down his screen for the entire meal. And the other day, one of my best friends who has children didn't communicate or respond to me with technology for more than 24 hours. And he sort of apologized, and then he said, we had a technology-free day. We need those in our families. At least some technology-free hours. You know, I actually grew up in a home where there was one telephone. Does anybody remember that? It actually had a cord on it. And the cord was about this long. Did I ever have a 3-hour conversation with a friend? Did I have a long, anguishing anything in the middle of the night? Because you see, my mother pretty much sat next to that phone my entire adolescence. And by the way, when I walked in the door, my home was a safe haven. Nobody could reach me unless they wanted to talk to my mom first. The literature says something like this. 1/3 of teenage girls actually wake up in the middle of the night to check to see who posted what about them. And I made the obvious recommendation to parents in a suburb of Atlanta. Take charge of the technology. It is a privilege. It is not a right. Tell your children it is bedtime. Hand me your phone. Hand me your iPad. Hand me your laptop. They will all be charged and handed back to you in the morning. But a mom stayed behind. She said, but what if my 13-year-old daughter's friends wanted to talk to her in the middle of the night? They wouldn't be able to reach her. What's wrong with your daughter's friends, like actually talking to their own parents? And I guess, Mom, if you have your daughter's phone and you want to answer it at 2:30 in the morning, you could. By the way, if you have a 12-year-old daughter and you're about to buy a laptop with a camera in it, what do you think I'm going to say to you? Don't do that. Don't be in a hurry for all of these things. The other day in a prestigious private school in Houston, a parent of a 3rd grade girl came up to me and said, I'm thinking about getting an iPhone for my 8-year-old daughter, but you know, I'm not sure I want her to have 24-hour internet access. Well, let me think about that for just a moment, Mom. When did I first get my cell phone with internet access? I believe I was 56. Why does your daughter need this now? Oh, all of her friends have one. So I'm trying to give you permission to set some limits. I spoke at a 6th grade orientation in the fall. And I said the things you would expect, reminding parents that technology is a privilege, not a right. Your happiness cannot depend on whether or not your 11-year-old likes you right at this moment. I almost wanted to have the parents stand up and repeat after me, I am the parent. I didn't go that far, but the principal called me the next day. She said, the 6th grade parents loved what you had to say. Well, that's great. They want you to come back. Why would I come back? They want you to tell their children why they're going to change a few things. So it's like they really just didn't get the key message. Cyberbullying and bullying, unfortunately, have consequences for decades. Cyberbullying is like the perfect forum for relational bullying. And things posted online can be far more hurtful and humiliating. Sometimes things are at least moderated about what we say person to person, but not necessarily online. And it's quite a challenge for us to try to figure out what is happening online and what can we do about it. The other problem is in our families, when our teenager is the technology guru, we are in trouble. We need to have OIT experts for Pembroke Pines and the schools continually conversing and posting information for parents so we can all keep up with social networks. And sadly, many children have been exposed to trauma. The current word is trauma-informed care. So instead of us always wondering, why is a kid behaving that way, we should really be thinking, what happened to them? What happened to them in terms of what are called adverse childhood experiences? Those are all the things we don't want kids to endure: living in poverty, neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, living with a substance abusing family member, living with a mentally ill family member. I wish we could somehow stop all those adverse childhood experiences. So a few quick points from Common Sense Media. They have excellent recommendations for us. They rate all the programs, they rate all the movies, and they give us guidance about who should be watching that. However, I think the most important point up there is the last one. Basically saying, if parents were really paying attention, the majority of our teens would actually change their online behavior. You know what I like to see in families? The desktop. It's on the kitchen counter. It's in the family room, rather than kids isolated in their room. And in some of our families, frankly, the adolescent's room is made up to be a little kingdom. If the adolescent has their telephone, their television, their movies, their music, tell me, why are they coming out of that room? It's only one reason: mom made dinner. But watch them try to pick up that plate of food and take it back into their rooms. So take control of those things. And I realize if your adolescent is already used to a great deal of freedom, it's going to be difficult to make dramatic changes. But how about sitting around the kitchen table with you and your partner and talking about a family screen usage plan? And of course, those of you that have small children, I'm encouraging you to really take control and move slowly with all of that screen access. What about that figure? 6.5 hours a day. What's it interfere with? Actual interpersonal relationships. These kids are actually more connected than ever before, but they're isolated, they're depressed. I mean, good news might be less sex, less substance abuse, but they're staying home and they are isolated. They're not exercising. That's another potential problem. And all those screens interfere with sleep. And by the way, a long time ago, I just decided to tell everybody what I think. So here it is. The national recommendation for when a secondary school in this country should start is never before 8:30. Last month, I was in a secondary school in Orlando. That bell rang at 5 minutes after 7. You know, I used to think it was easy. You just get your kids in bed earlier. But they're not really wired to go to bed early. So adolescents are chronically sleep deprived, and that contributes to depression and suicide. Responding to multiple suicides in Palo Alto, California, and I want to make a couple of points. Gunn High School is #1 in the state of California. The problem is you can practically look out the window and see Stanford. Unfortunately, Stanford is the 4th hardest university in the nation to get into. So success at Gunn High School is measured at getting into Stanford, getting a degree, going to work nearby at Apple, Google, Facebook. You're a millionaire in no time. That's not the way it works out for many people. And by the way, if your adolescents were here tonight, you know what I would share with them? Pretty simply. Guess what? I got kicked out of college the first time for poor scholarship. All I can tell you is I would have been a lousy accountant. Maybe it turned out okay, and thanks for that nice introduction, Mr. Castellano. Kids might stumble, and believing the only way to success is to get into the flagship state universities, that isn't necessary. There are lots of ways to be successful. Sometimes they should stay home an extra year, go to a community college, maybe work for a while. For me, I got drafted during the Vietnam War. That woke me up in terms of being a little more motivated when I had the chance to go back to college. So screens interfere with a lot. Some pretty basic suggestions here. You've already heard no screens in the bedrooms. Now what about the no screens in cars? All right, I grant you that navigation feature is pretty supreme, but we should put it on the auditory, not on the visual. Here's a phrase I hope you'll remember. Don't be intoxicated. By the way, the modeling we do is critically important. If I text while I drive my car, why would I not expect all 4 of our children to do absolutely the same? Emerson had a great quote. What we do speaks so loudly to our children that when we try to talk to them, they cannot hear us. Do you know what teenagers say about texting in cars? What's the big deal? I mean, I look up every 5 to 10 seconds. Unfortunately, accidents and tragedies could happen in a very short time. And I feel really strongly about the car accidents and prevention. Where I worked, we had more than 110,000 students. I was the go-to guy after every tragedy for 24 years, whether I wanted to be or not. I went into classrooms countless times after the death of a student from a car accident. I hope you will look up what are called graduated driving laws in Florida, and I hope you will enforce them. 16-year-olds die in car accidents 3 times more often than 18-year-olds. It's all about inexperience and distractions. Graduated driving laws restrict the hours and restrict the number of passengers. What's the leading cause of death for a kid in America? It's an accident. Secondary student, probably a car accident. Elementary student, they probably drowned or it was a bicycle accident. By the way, how safe do you think our communities are to ride bicycles? How many times do you see a kid with a bicycle helmet? We need to do a better job of safeguarding children on bicycles. Online activity, these points are pretty straightforward. Yes, it is your business, and you need to talk to kids about their online behavior. You need to start early and control and know those passwords and let them know that. Why are you going to check on all these things? Because you care about them. And I want to give one quick example with our youngest daughter. She went to a high school of 4,000. Jill would come home in the middle of a school year and say something like this. Dad, my English teacher doesn't know my name. She has me confused with 2 other girls with brown hair and braces. Since I believe Jill is like one of the most wonderful girls who ever lived, can you see how frustrating that would be that the teacher doesn't know her name, let alone her hopes and dreams? And you know what I hope for every single one of you? You believe your sons and daughters are the most wonderful children who ever lived. Not for the person that they might become someday, just for the kid they are today. You show them that every day, every way, your unconditional love for them, you've given them a tremendous advantage in this world. I'm a big believer in always telling children the truth in developmentally appropriate language. And it's tell them what's happened and then simply wait and see what questions they might have for you. Don't tell them everything you know about something. Give them some developmentally appropriate information, then simply answer their questions. Give them a range of emotions, permission for all of those. There's no right or wrong way to feel about something. Let them know after a traumatic event they'll have a chance to talk about it, write about it, music, artwork, project, ceremonies, and rituals. One quick example, and yes, it's a sad one. 14-year-old boy found his 15-year-old sister hanging dead in the closet. Let's pick it up the next morning. Let's call him Brian. Mom and Dad are saying, Brian asked us for a nightlight in his room last night. We told him absolutely not. Mom and Dad, wait a minute. Let him have a nightlight. Regression behaviorally is to be expected. I guarantee you it will not be on in his room a year from now. Now let's pick it up 5 weeks later. All of Brian's teachers are sitting around the conference table. One at a time they go, he failed my class. He failed every class. They're like, oh well, they're closing their grade books. I'm the one person saying, wait a minute, don't you remember what happened 5 weeks ago? Can't we do something besides fail him in every single class? We need to be compassionate. We need to reach out to these families. And I did have some involvement after Parkland, and we all need to keep those families in our prayers. And having responded to many school shootings over the years, sometimes I go back and I hear something like this. From a mom or dad who lost their child, they say, even the people closest to me, they say you should be over this by now. I'm tired of hearing you talk about that. What should our response be? I am here for you forever. Any and every time you want to talk about this. And the idea that somebody gets over having their child shot and killed, that's simply not going to happen. They're going to be hopefully moving towards this new normal, but their lives are frankly changed forever. And there you see the most typical reactions children have to a traumatic event. I mentioned the regression behaviorally and academically, but also nightmares, sleeping problems, worries about the future. Can you simply figure out who kids turn to the most to try to figure out how upset to be about something? They look to their parents. And if mom's sitting in a dark room, a quiet room, she's crying virtually every day when her children come home from school, that's not what we want mom to be modeling. We want mom to be modeling optimism and hope. And if mom's having a lot of difficulty with something, we want her to turn to her friends or maybe even to mental health services. Don't project all of our thoughts and worries about this world onto our children. I'd be remiss tonight not to say something. Schools remain the safest places children in America could possibly be. I think you know where most kids actually get murdered in our country. And sadly, it's in our homes, and it's by their own family members. Someday, we're going to have to face that in America. And we've got to work on prevention, not just at school, but in our homes and in our communities and in our neighborhoods. Having said that, of course, one violent death on a school campus in America is totally unacceptable. And a few of my graduate students are here tonight. A few weeks ago, I brought in and gave them a copy of my first congressional testimony from 1999. and I made them read it. And then one of them says, wasn't this like 3 weeks before Columbine? Yes, that's true. Another one said, you could have written this last week. In fact, all those things that I wrote about in 1999 and testified before Congress about, those are all the things we're still struggling with. Frankly, we've not changed anything. And maybe our youth will actually lead the way. Because those young people at Stoneman Douglas, some of them are old enough to vote right now, and the others will be old enough to vote in the very near future. And maybe they will actually start changing some things. Getting kids back into a routine, back in school is critically important. Trying to resume the routines in our family. If I take a simple example like the horrific night of 9/11/01, you know what an 8-year-old kid here in South Florida wanted? Mom and Dad to turn off the television, read them a story, play catch, do whatever they normally do. That is what helps our children, resuming routines as quickly as possible. So, resiliency. That's arguably the biggest word in all of psychology and counseling. Probably some of you know a person in your life that after the traumatic event, it's like their life was over. They never reinvested in relationships. Maybe they never even went back to work. Maybe they developed a substance abuse problem. Maybe they even took their own life. But you probably also know people that went on with their lives. They were always sad about what happened, but they got help. They did reinvest in relationships. And what's really the key to this ability to bounce back? And resiliency is primarily learned. We have to remain optimistic about the future. We need to be surrounded by loving and caring family and friends. We need to be comfortable venting strong emotions. And we need to use problem-solving skills. Now, can everybody take a moment and visualize who is that negative person in your life who gives you the benefit of their negativity like every time you see them? Can you think of that person right now? Well, here's your tip for tonight. Stay away from that person. Seek out the people in your life that are positive and encouraging. That's what we all need. I've covered every point up there but the last one. Working now with children for 40 years, I often find there's a very big gap between what mom and dad think is going on in their kids' lives and what's actually happening. Some of our teens in particular are leading secret lives that have to do with sex, drugs, and reckless behavior. And you need to make sure you know exactly what's going on. And unfortunately, in our communities, it's never very hard for an adolescent to obtain alcohol. Do you know what I said to Jill, our youngest? Jill, the law is 21. I will never look the other way. I will never condone it. I will certainly never provide it for you. And Jill, I think I need to share with you, in my humble opinion, all 4 of your grandparents were alcoholics. Alcoholism runs in the Poland family. Do you think the Polands are alone in that? Don't look the other way. And there have been tragedies all around the country where parents hosted a party and thought it'd be okay for all the kids to get bombed at their house. Unfortunately, those kids all got in cars and drove away. And accidents and tragedies have happened. So we've talked a little bit about taking charge and knowing that cars represent a great danger to your children. The irony, why did you give them this phone? That was for safety. But the phone in the car can be very dangerous. Do you know you can actually program this phone so that it will not operate in a moving vehicle? There are a lot of things you can do with this phone technologically to take charge. And the OIT people and your schools would be very familiar with that. Now, somehow, I doubt that I'm the only person here tonight that experienced a divorce. For me, that was 6 times. Just kidding. And by the way, we have a very serious subject tonight, so I have already had a couple of attempts to break a little bit of the tension. But you know what really helped? And by the way, it was only 1 divorce, and it was a remarriage 3 years later. Do you know what really helped? My first wife, now my ex-wife, is a psychologist. We made a pact. You don't talk badly about me to our children. I will not talk badly about you. And when Joan, our youngest, came to me and was saying negative things about her mom, my ex-wife, do you think there was a time I wanted to pile on and add to that? Of course. But I never did. See, I always remembered something. She's always going to be Jill's mom. She always deserves my respect. And she deserved my financial support until Jill came of age. And I still remember one suicide note a young lady left. It was entitled, "Dear Sir or Father, don't blame me for not knowing you. I have the picture of you holding me once. It was the last time, and why?" We've got to keep dads involved in their children's lives. When dad is involved, healthier, happier, better achieving kids. A person very close to me, my best friend, when he was 8, Dad left, leaving his mom without a high school diploma to try to care for 3 children, never sending a dime, never returning a letter or a phone call. And Rick and I were at a national conference 40 years later, so he's 48 years old, and now Dad wants to make nice. Can anything make up for a rejection from your dad for 40 years? I was there when they met. And Rick was pleasant. And then Rick's dad died a few years later, leaving him quite a lot of money. Rick said, "I don't want this money. I'm not going to take it." Where was his help when I needed it? And I said, "Rick, you've got grandchildren. Take the money, give it to your grandchildren." But the question for you is, how do you make sure that children do not feel in the middle every way with divorce and separation issues? You know, I've met like 8-year-old kids that say things like, "If I'd have been better last year in 2nd grade, I bet my daddy wouldn't have left us." How do we make sure that kids understand that the marriage did not break up because of the children? And how do we help the parents understand, guess what? You are partners for life in raising these children. And when I go back to Houston, where a son is a minister, a daughter is an attorney, any birthday, any milestone, any grandchild occasion to celebrate, everybody's there and everybody's nice. That's what every kid in this world deserves, to have all the adults in his or her life get along. Restitution, incredibly important, and I'll give you a simple example. Jeremy was 3 years old. He was angry about being sent to his room. He throws open the door, and I see the doorknob go through the drywall. And am I angry about that? Do I want to grab him? Do I want to yell at him? Of course. But I don't. I go to the other end of the house. When I came back calm, I had a simple question for Jeremy. How are you going to repair the hole you put in the wall of your room? He's 3 years old. He doesn't know. He starts crying. Jeremy, grab your piggy bank. We're going to Ace Hardware right now. I took him gently by the hand, and Jeremy bought the materials, and Jeremy helped me fix the hole in the wall in his room. Now, most recently, my partner, and by the way, if we could all learn to say the word partner, that would actually be pretty important in this world. Because sometimes I've had people come up to me and say, "You got to stop sounding like every relationship that's significant is between a man and a woman." So whenever I remember, I try to use the word partner. But my partner was the director at U School on the Nova campus. And my partner would say something like this. It's like every parent is an attorney or they're bringing their attorney. And all I want to do is have a kid experience a consequence. They made a mistake. Every kid makes mistakes. We need to separate their worth as a person from their misbehavior. But kids need to experience consequences. They don't need an attorney lobbying on their behalf to try to get them out of an after-school detention. And by the way, I want to say something about school personnel. I love the people that work in schools. They care about children. They do not have it in for a particular child. And if they ever tell you as a parent there is a problem, understand they sincerely care about your child. Don't be defensive. Follow their recommendations so we get all of the adults working together. Okay, this was about the dads. Margaret Mead had a great quote, and I want to compliment every single dad that made it here tonight. Thank you very much for being here. Margaret Mead said, perhaps the true measure of a society is, can we teach the men to be good fathers? When our son had his first child, now he has 6 under the age of 8. Would somebody please tell him to stop? My advice to Jeremy was this simple. There cannot be a single aspect of childcare that you do not do. I hope your goal is to do 50% or more of everything. That's what we need from the men in our families. Okay, now getting to very important part of our presentation tonight. The Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey has been done for nearly 30 years by the Center for Disease Control, and it has some very disturbing data about high school kids. Let's just zero in on 8.6% of all high school kids in this country made a suicide attempt in the last 12 months. From my office window, I can see Nova Public High School, about 2,000 students. What's this mean? 172 of them that walked in there this morning made a suicide attempt in the last 12 months. Who is the most likely to make an attempt tomorrow? That's the kid with the previous history. Do you know what's really scary? For the most part, those kids' parents don't know. Their teachers don't know. Their counselors, their principal doesn't know. But who knows all about their suicidal behavior? That would be their friends. The very friends that nobody ever talked to about what to look for, what to do. Suicide doesn't have to happen. How to use the 24-hour crisis helpline or the crisis text line. We need to talk about suicide prevention more. Our homes, our schools, and in our churches. We have to dispel the biggest myth holding us back is people somehow got the idea if we talk about it, then a kid might think about it for the first time. So look at the data behind me. Do you think you're going to find me a high school student in your community that doesn't know somebody who at least talked about suicide? I imagine most of them know somebody who attempted. And sadly, many of them would know somebody who actually died by suicide. I'm always going to use that term, died by. I am not going to use the word committed with this topic. You tell someone their loved one committed something, they're going to say you commit a crime, you commit a burglary. And by the way, we have a great initiative right here in South Florida. We have the Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention. You have Jackie Rosen and her husband, Harry. And by the way, who do you think drives suicide prevention in this country? That would be the surviving family members. the ones that never want it to happen to somebody else's son and daughter. And we've got some problems when kids receive treatment, because I argue that a kid was hospitalized for being suicidal. We've got to let key personnel at school know, so they're able to reach out and support them, so they're going to be keenly aware of warning signs. We need to have things called re-entry meetings, where the hospital shares information with the school so we can all work together. And sadly, sometimes the kid was in a hospital for being suicidal and nobody actually jointly developed with them a safety plan. What's that all about? How can you keep yourself safe? What internal mechanisms, what external resources, what ideas do you have if you ever have those thoughts again? The other thing I've experienced is that parents have a tendency to think, oh, that was scary. My son was suicidal. We can not have to worry about that anymore. And it's like the last thing in the world they ever bring up with their child when there should. If you ever have those thoughts again, I'm here for you. What can you do? We need to realize that suicide prevention and even suicide assessment, it's an ongoing process, and we need to be comfortable talking about this subject. All right, a few quick facts about bullying. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Tends to peak in middle school. Now let's go to only 1/3 of bullying victims told adults. And let me also share with you the Secret Service prior knowledge study, the results of their study on targeted school violence. 81% of school shooters told one or more people exactly what they planned to do. And so here's the question. If you're a bullying victim, if you're suicidal, if somebody is threatening violence, why don't kids run to principals like Peter right away and tell him? Well, here's what kids say. I didn't think it could happen. I didn't want to get involved. I have been conditioned not to tell. Ever heard snitches get stitches? How do we wipe that out of kids' thoughts? What's a good friend do? What would Peter do if he had an elderly neighbor who was suicidal? And by the way, who is the highest risk group for suicide in America? You're looking at them. White males over the age of 65 when they have financial, health, and relationship problems. But if Peter got help for an elderly guy like me, would we call him a snitch? Or would we compliment him on being a good person? This is what a responsible person does. And sadly, sometimes kids say, I'm sorry, I don't trust any of the adults. I don't have go-to adults. And we need to make sure that all of our students feel connected to school. I could summarize the most comprehensive study of adolescent behavior in our country's history with one sentence. School connection is the key to everything for a kid. We got to have them involved. I don't care if it's drama, chess, dance, robotics, football, whatever it is, we've got to have our students involved in school or community activities. And by the way, I'll give you an example from where I used to work. High school principal says, these Hispanic boys in the high school, they love basketball, but they be too short. By the way, how many 6'5" and taller Hispanic men have you seen walking around? Are they going to make the team in a massive high school? But what's the point? They love basketball. How do we open up the gym? How do we have programs at the YMCA? How do we make sure they have the opportunity to play a game they love? Though there are some pretty sobering statistics for you. Let's take the last point. I'm going to be really honest. I went back to Houston in the fall, where I worked for 25 years, and I did a big presentation for psychology interns from all over the 4th largest city in the country. And one of them says, Okay, you were here a quarter century. What do you wish you'd have done better? I answered honestly. We did not support the GLBT students enough. Then the next question was, why didn't you? That's because the superintendent told us not to. Now, South Florida may be the most diverse and accepting place that I've ever lived. Schools here have gay-straight alliances. You go north of Orlando, it's like you just arrived in Georgia. You want a gay-straight alliance north of Orlando, the American Civil Liberties Union is probably going to have to sue the school. This population has a very high suicide rate, about 4 times that of their heterosexual peers, but it has absolutely nothing to do with sexual orientation. It has to do with crap and rejection they get sometimes from the people closest to them. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and please turn to your neighbor and answer it. What is the single greatest protective factor for a gay youth in this country? Turn to your neighbor and tell them what that protective factor is. That factor is parental acceptance. But have you ever had a friend who said something like, when I came out, my dad said I was dead to him. He hasn't spoken to me for 20 years. That's going to create some pretty serious problems. How do we work on this parental acceptance? Okay, studies show a positive relationship between bullying and suicide. Do they show a causal relationship? No, because how are you going to rule out all those adverse childhood experiences I mentioned? How are you going to rule out untreated or undertreated mental illness? Whenever I'm aware of yet another youth suicide, and somebody contacted me from Gainesville, Florida today, I always think untreated or undertreated mental illness. We've got to get these individuals treatment and support in their schools, communities, and families. Here's what I sometimes hear from parents. Oh, how do I know he's really depressed? I mean, aren't all teenagers irritable? He's withdrawing from the family. He's moody. He's cranky. Maybe he's preparing me for. He's going away to Florida State next year. Well, Mom and Dad, let me ask you a couple of questions. Is this pervasive? Is this affecting all aspects of their life? Homeschool and peers? Is it persistent? Has it gone on for 2 or 3 weeks or more? And has he dropped out of what was previously a pleasurable activity? Yeah, as a matter of fact, he was on a certain team for 3 years. This year I was so surprised when he said he didn't care about it anymore. Persistent, pervasive, they've dropped out of pleasurable activities. Your kid is depressed. Get them mental health treatment. Do not hesitate. The literature says 20% of all teenagers suffer from depression at some point in those tumultuous years, but sadly, 80% of them receive no treatment whatsoever. We've got to recognize when they're depressed, and we have to get them help. So, pretty well covered those in terms of other teen signs of depression. It can be triggered by a stressful event. I had a big planning meeting with the Broward schools, and one of the things I said is, sadly, increases in youth suicides follow school shootings. So they're going to have to work hard on suicide prevention in addition to a lot of other things. And we're learning more and more about depression being related to chemicals in the brain and the treatment. The best treatment, that would simply be cognitive behavioral talk therapy, yes, and many times in conjunction with medication. A lot of us in the field, you know what we actually believe? Part of the reason youth suicide rates have gone up so much is the black box warning on antidepressants for adolescents and parents being totally against what sometimes was a desperately needed medication for their child. Don't be afraid to talk to your kid about this subject. Know the risk factors and warning signs. They'll be on the next slide. Act immediately to get help. Look to personnel like school counselors and school psychologists to help you. At Nova, we have the Psychological Service Center clinics. We've got many of them, so many of them, I can't ever remember all the different names of those clinics. We have a lot of them. They're low cost. They also, in the aftermath of Parkland, are providing 4 free sessions to anyone affected by the Parkland shooting. There's a phrase I like. It's called circle of care. The circle of care around the child, the teacher, very importantly, the parent, a school counselor, somebody in the community, maybe a physician, maybe a private practicing mental health professional. Everybody working together to help this child. I cannot overstate the last point. If you don't believe me, check out the website from Harvard called meansmatter.com. It's actually pretty simple. You take away the gun, the suicide is extremely unlikely to happen. And for everybody who thinks, oh, but wouldn't they just find another way? That's what the research from Harvard has summarized from all around the world. No, they just don't find another way. And most of the time, you never get a second chance if the attempt was with a gun. There are the suicide warning signs. Making out a will, giving away prized possession, dramatic changes in behavior, depressed, helpless, hopeless, feeling overwhelmed and incredibly stressed. And if you were listening to my comments earlier, if I could, I'd take away a lot of the academic stress that is placed on students. I gave you an example where, hey, it worked out for me and I wasn't such a great student the first time around. And responding to multiple suicides at Woodson High School in Fairfax County, Virginia, and meeting with the students, they said, we put a lot of stress on ourselves. Like we're constantly asking each other, what is your class rank? All I can tell you is I went through 4 years of high school and nobody ever asked me that question. That's not what we were ever talking about. It was about enjoying life. It was about what's happening this weekend. It was about certainly hopes for the future, but it was never tell me what your class rank is. And today I heard an example that I just couldn't believe it. But high achieving kids sometimes will actually give each other the wrong answer, because in so doing, I'm going to cause you to screw up, and that might elevate me. And I'm going to be honest, where do I think almost all of this came from? I think it came from parents. And our youngest daughter actually got 1 B in high school in an AP class. You know, I couldn't bring myself to say, hey, Jill, you're not going to be going to the University of Texas like you planned. I said instead, there's lots of other great universities. By the way, she's an attorney now. And in year 4, she makes more money than her dad. So I guess it turned out okay for her, even though, no, the University of Texas simply would not accept her. And think about all these kids that mom, dad, grandpa, aunts, uncles, they all got into the University of Florida, and now all of a sudden they can't go there. So how can we help them understand there are many ways to success and a lot of great universities? Suicidal notes, postings on the media, very, very important to be alert for all of those. I truly do believe that everyone plays a role in suicide prevention. And there are evidence-based treatment for all mental health problems. Couple of quick recommendations for your schools. The elementary level, we got to be working on bicycle safety. We got to be working on safety around water. Middle school, we unfortunately have to start talking about trying to prevent tragedies from the choking game. And we have to start talking about suicide prevention as well. And if I had a chance to talk to 10th grade parents, I'd want to put in like 5 minutes about don't be in a hurry for your kid to drive. Your kid's got some issues, maybe with like impulsivity and ADHD. I wouldn't put them behind the wheel at all for at least another year. And enforce the graduated driving laws and have certain rules about that phone in their car. And I love it when schools sponsor and provide sessions like this for parents, because it is challenging to raise a child in today's world. Am I glad that all 4 of ours, and by the way, did you notice I said all 4 of ours? I didn't call anybody a step anything. Now, the 2 daughters from my wife's first marriage, I didn't meet them until they were 20 or 22. I wish I'd have met them earlier, but I didn't. But they're all ours. And that's important in our blended families. So information for parents is very important. I talked about utilizing the school technology experts. And then I always have a simple question for schools, and I'll ask it of your community resources. If I were to go to the website for Pembroke Pines, and I were to put in that search engine, youth suicide or teenage depression, what comes up? Because something needs to come up. The warning signs, the crisis hotline, the crisis text line, maybe most importantly, who do I contact in the city office? Who do I contact at school? I might be searching for myself, my friend, or my kid. Protective factors, and by the way, these come from the World Health Organization. Good relationship with other kids. But I've got a question for you. Who does a disturbed kid turn to for help? I'm going to argue a disturbed kid, they probably turn to another kid that has as many or more problems than they do. And between 2 or 3 of them, they don't know enough to get a mom or a teacher or a coach or the supervisor at work involved. So that's the problem. Knowing when to seek adult help. And by the way, I'm a big believer in confidence and friendships. But what is the glaring exception? Your friend is talking about dangerous behavior, harming themselves or harming someone else. That's when a good friend actually steps forward and gets adult help. Last week I was on a program with the executive director for Safe to Tell in Colorado. Here's the bottom line. Most kids are not going to call 911. Safe to Tell is the Colorado safety line for kids. It's staffed 24 hours a day. To my knowledge, Florida does not have one. And Susan Payne told me most of the calls to Safe to Tell Colorado are about bullying, they're about threats of violence, or they're about suicide. Here's something else that Florida does not have. We do not have a school safety center. Other states have extremely well-funded ones. In fact, the Texas one, housed at Texas State University, if you visited the Texas School Safety Center, you would go, oh my, there's like 20 full-time people working on school safety in Texas. The other day, I got an email from somebody at the Florida Department of Education. And across the bottom, he listed himself as the director of safe schools for the state of Florida. Now, I've been here 13 years. Safe schools are sort of my thing. How could I not have been aware of this person? And probably because they have like 5 or 6 other duties, like maybe being in charge of services for homeless youth, truancy, So Florida needs a school safety center that could advise all of us about what do we need to do to absolutely work towards zero incidents of violence in Florida schools. The rest of these are pretty straightforward, except I'm going to be honest. You don't have health insurance in this country. You don't have an affluent lifestyle, and you got a family member with a mental illness. I don't know what you're going to do, because services that are provided by our state, frankly, in my opinion, are lacking. Religion is a wonderful protective factor. The church, the synagogue, the mosque. It's a place where kids belong. It's a place where kids get shepherded and mentored by adults. And in Palo Alto at Gunn High School, they have a rather interesting political situation. You see, the chair of the English department retired. He formed a political activism group called Save the 2008. Pretty clever, because there's 2008 kids at Gunn High School. So what does he want? Social and emotional wellness. Don't put a kid in another AP class without a counselor carefully studying whether that is a wise thing to do. He wanted to do away with 0 hour. Do you know what 0 hour is? You go to school an hour early before everybody else so you can take an extra class. Do you know what I said when I was there? Do away with it. Adolescents are chronically sleep deprived. Don't start school for some of them at 6:30 in the morning. Okay? And then he wants a homework app. He wants kids to record the amount of homework they do so the school can maybe make wiser decisions and maybe work on simple things like the math department gives their homework on Wednesday because the science department did it on Tuesday. So kids don't feel overwhelmed with homework from every subject on the same night. Other protective factors, I already talked about the stability and cohesion and everybody being nice in our families, but I want to give you a problem-solving example. Jeremy was 8 years old, and I sat him down and said, "Son, I need to talk to you more about the death of your grandfather." He says, I'm sorry I never met him, Dad, but you already told me what happened. You told me that he had a heart attack. Yes, son, that's true. He did have a heart attack. But there's more to the story. I want you to hear this from me, never from somebody else. 2 weeks after his heart attack, your grandfather actually shot himself. It was death by suicide. He looks at me and he says, "You lied to me." "No, son, I didn't really lie. Just waiting to give you more complete information." He thinks a minute and he looks up and he says, "Dad, you shouldn't feel bad." "Oh, why is that?" "Well, your parents, they weren't both psychologists like mine are. They couldn't possibly have taught you all the things that I know about the importance of always feeling good about yourself and knowing everybody has problems. You just have to go get help." Now, wasn't that sweet? He was trying to alleviate my guilt. What's the most important point? He's 8 years old. He believes he's a good person. Isn't that what you want for every single kid in Pembroke Pines? I wish I could give you magic dust. Take it into your schools tomorrow and sprinkle it over the head of every single kid. Because when they believe I'm a good person, that's another thing that is an incredible protective factor for them. The rest of those are pretty straightforward. I want to share with you a frustration. And by the way, I still want to pitch for the Astros, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I love baseball. And when I think, what was my batting average, and actually convincing parents, your kid has a problem, your family needs to seek mental health treatment. And I always delivered those recommendations in my best bedside manner. All I can tell you is I never would have made the All-Star team. I think I batted maybe about 2 out of 10. It's really difficult to get people to follow through. And I would always call them back. I told them yesterday their kid was suicidal. I call back and they say, oh, well, no, we didn't keep that appointment because she's really so much better today. Well, what changed about her coping skills and her problem solving in 24 hours? I do not agree with you. Get professional help for your child. I talked about resiliency earlier. There are the keys to resiliency. We've talked about those. I have just a couple more slides, and then we're going to see what questions you have. What do children need according to the Carnegie Foundation for Success? 3 or more significant adults involved in their lives besides parents. The reality is most of us have decided, let's just try for 1. 3 is probably too ambitious. So what am I talking about? She's singing in the church choir next Sunday. Who's going to show up? Is the next door neighbor who's retired going to show up? Is maybe somebody from school going to show up? Is an aunt going to drive down from, someplace out of town? Who's going to show up just to say, you are important to me? Something I'm really proud to tell you. In 1974, I signed up to be a big brother when I was a graduate student. Rodney, who is African American, was 13 years old. He went down to the big brother's office and said, give me a white big brother. They looked at him like, why are you asking for a white big brother? Well, I look around at the black men in my community. I live in the projects. They're into this, they're into that. I'm just hoping maybe a white big brother would have more time for me. By the way, Rodney never knew his dad. His mom was on welfare. No uncles. Nobody ever stepped forward. But I did. Rodney and I have had a very rewarding relationship. And I haven't talked to Rodney since last week. Rodney turned 56 years old last October. Now, big brothers, doesn't expect a 43-year plus commitment, but I was happy to do that. But here's the bottom line. You want a big brother in virtually any city in America, you're going to wait like 4 years. You sign up when you're 10 and they finally call when you're 14, you don't care anymore. You want a big sister? You probably get one of those in like 4 months. That says a lot about the differences between men and women and stepping forward and getting involved in the lives of children. You know what I'm proud to tell you about Jill, our youngest? As soon as she got her first job and moved to Houston after law school, she signed up to be a big sister to Anna, who was 10 years old at the time. That is paying it forward. And here's something I cannot overstress. It's the last point up there. Adolescents need to do volunteer work. Perhaps the only way an adolescent can truly find themselves is through service to other people. You actually help people that are really hurting. You know what you learn? That little upset I just had with my 14-year-old friend, I can kind of put that in perspective now. Jill volunteered in lots of things. And by the way, in Texas, we have a class that Florida doesn't have called PALS, Peer Assistance and Leadership. She was in it for 2 years, 1 hour every day, peer mediation, tutoring kids at the elementary school, putting on a party at the retirement center. She learned the world did not revolve around her. Senior prom time. Dad, I found a dress I really like. I don't want my first question to be, Jill, how much is this dress going to cost us? I'm like, okay, what do you like about the dress so much? She describes it, and then she says, well, Dad, it's a little over $850. Well, Jill, what happened to the dress you wore to the prom last year? I mean, Peter, you're with me on this, right? Does anybody remember the dress she wore last year? But some of the women here are not so sure. But Jill could tell I wasn't too wild about spending the money on something she was going to wear once and then put away. She came back a couple days later. Dad, we're not going to have to buy a dress at all. I'm going to wear Sarah's dress. Her high school prom's on another date. I already put on her dress. It works really great on me. I like it. Hey, maybe you could give some money to a charity. Doesn't have to be $850, of course. By the way, the question is not whether I can afford it. Does it really make sense today when you actually know people are hurting to spend so much money? I don't know about you, but I never got in a limousine until I was 58 years old. So kids taking a limousine to a middle school dance, I think is a little over the top. A new school had to make rules like nobody can come by helicopter. Because otherwise, seriously, families would try to outdo themselves. A sense of safety, security, and belonging, and the homeschool and community, and organized activities for everybody. But there's two types here. My message to you school parents, to the parents in high-performing, affluent schools, here was my message. Make your kids' life revolve around your family. Tell them one activity a season. Don't let the school team clash with the club team, the school arts performance conflict with the community one activity a season. But then there was Lee, who was a 9-year-old kid that I worked with regularly at Millsap Elementary School in Houston. So one day Lee says, Dr. Poland, you know what I want more than anything? I just want to play Little League Baseball. Well, hey, great, Lee. I saw the forms in the office. Let me get you signed up for that. Oh, but you don't understand. My mom doesn't have $75. And even if she did, she works nights. Ever since my dad left, there's no way I could get to a practice. That's the case for a lot of kids in this country, where a few very privileged kids have way too many activities. By the way, I signed up to coach soccer. Jeremy was 5. Did I know anything about it? No, but I was the head coach and I learned. But most of all, I wanted them to have fun. Do you know I had 9 kids that played on my team for 11 years? But that first year, Bobby Bryant's name was on there. But he doesn't come to a practice. And I call up his mom. Take his name off the list. His dad left us. I work nights. He's in a daycare. I can't possibly get him to your practice. Well, Claire, if you were to give me written permission, I could pick him up after school, take him to practice, and I'll deliver him to your home after you get back from work. You know that I took Bobby Bryant to practice until he was old enough to drive his own car? And Bobby Bryant and I are now friends on Facebook. So there is the number for the Psychological Service Center Clinic. There is how to contact me, and we have questions.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Dr. Poland. So, Dr. Poland, just to accent your last slide, we got a comment from one of the audience members. The other day, my 12-year-old daughter thanked her mom and I for taking away her phone. She said it has allowed her to connect better with friends and focus. So, our first question is, Dr. Poland, what are the major warning signs for a child who is mentally unstable or suicidal?
Okay, great question. One of the things we have to look for in terms of if we're concerned about instability and possibly violence towards others, some of the cues are pretty dramatic in terms of cutting out articles about school shooters, posting them on bulletin boards, being disillusioned with school, not being connected to others. I think I pretty well answered the part about the warning signs of suicide, and be looking for pervasive changes in behavior that affect home, school, peers, persistent, and a kid that's dropped out of something that's like they used to love that.
Right. Thank you. I just have a couple of more questions, and then we'll be breaking for this evening. I'll have Commissioner Siple just say a few closing remarks. So just another 10 minutes or so. I think these are very poignant questions. What is the best way to talk about children regarding the recent shooting at Stoneman Douglas?
Okay, that is really a challenge, but I think it's really important, first of all, to understand their developmental level. Secondly, we really need to turn off the television. That is my advice to all of you. Get the news, get a few facts, turn it off, call a friend, walk the dog, work in the garden. When we're glued to our televisions after horrifically traumatic events, that doesn't help all of us. And a simple question I always have is, you know, if your kid's 7 years old, is there really something they can do to prevent school violence? So let's let them know something sad happened, but let's not expose them to a lot of really upsetting, traumatic images. And we need to be telling our children, schools are safe places. No place, unfortunately, in our country is perfectly safe. But at any time, if you feel unsafe, go to the nearest adult. And my recommended activity, you know what I wish would have happened all around the nation the day after the Stoneman Douglas tragedy? Trained and empowered teachers put all the desks in a circle. How can we help you? What's on your mind? How can we help you feel safer? What ideas do you have about how we can make our schools safer? Always welcoming the input from students themselves.
Thank you very much. And now for closing remarks, Commissioner Siple. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. What did you all think about that? In our community, we're going to start this movement. We're going to make it happen. We're going to take back our families. We're going to make our schools, our churches, our synagogues, our malls, our movie theaters, our playgrounds. We're going to make them safe for our families and for our children. Again, I said it earlier, and I want to say it again. The students that have come out of this Marjory Stoneman Douglas, that have taken this initiative on a national level, need to be commended at every turn. They need to be supported at every turn. They are going to be the future. They are going to make changes. They are going to make positive changes for our country and for the world. And we need to show them our 1,000% support in everything that they do. And tonight was clearly not to be a political issue. It was to be about a family's issue. But I will tell you, these young folks that are standing up there and going to Washington, D.C., and going to their own state capitals, going to Tallahassee, going to their own state capitals, we need to show them support, that those folks that live in those areas, that are our representatives up there, our elected officials, need to stand up and listen to these kids, because these kids are going to be the future, and they are the voters. Change can happen. Remember the phrases, never again. Pretty easy to say, right? Pretty easy to say, but it takes a lot of hard work to make never again happen. I've been wearing for several weeks now, and I didn't put it on tonight, so I kind of feel funny not having it on, a pin that says, "Choose peace, stop violence." Pretty easy to do. Choose peace, stop violence. But we all have to collectively do that. We all have to collectively say, this is the future that we want. This is the future that we're going to give to our children and our grandchildren. A better place than what we have right now. I just want to take this opportunity again to thank everybody who helped so much to put this on. I can't thank Principal Castellano enough, and all of our principals that have worked out here so hard. Thank you again. I want to say how just very, very proud that I am of my city, Pembroke Pines, and the surrounding cities that have participated here today, especially Pembroke Pines for hosting this tonight. I want to say to you all also, this is the first in a series. We are working on Series 2 and Series 3. Series 2 or 3, we're not sure how they're working out yet, but they will be about tonight we were talking to you as adults. We want to talk to the children, we want to talk to the youth, and provide them with some very good information and help also. I would be remiss, I know the FISP group, Florida Institute for Suicide Prevention, was mentioned by Dr. Poland, and I know Jackie Rosen was out front handing out information about her organization. She actually came to our last school year, came to our Education Roundtable Forum, and was very, very instrumental in getting us moving forward in talking about these issues, talking about suicide, talking about bullying, cyberbullying, cutting, isolation, depression, all the things that our kids are going through. So I want to give her a very special thanks. I don't know if she can hear me out there, but if you see her, she's a very pretty woman out there with a big badge on that says FISP, and we just can't thank her enough for all that she has done and all that she continues to do. But last and certainly not least, I cannot say enough to thank two people here tonight. Dr. Raza, who's here, hiding in the back, and especially I cannot say enough to thank Dr. Scott Poland for coming out tonight. I always thought it was kind of neat with a guy with a bow tie on anyway, so. But I do hope that tonight was a very informative night for you all. I hope that it gave you opportunities that if you have questions or if you have concerns, that you now have some place that you can reach out to. 211 Broward is out front. Please stop by the tables out there and pick up information that will give you referrals. We are not referring anybody in particular, just 211, who is then a referral organization. For those of you that did not get to sign in before you came into the meeting, as a parent, you can sign in still out there and get your credit hours. Again, thank you all. Have a wonderful and safe weekend. Thank you.